I am not TPI. So if you're here to listen about them, that's not me. But I am Steve Snyder, and I do operate and direct the International Assisted Reproduction Center, which is an agency in the United States. So how many of you know the difference between an agency, a law firm, and a medical clinic? Raise your hands. I have a no.
No.
All right, so an agency is a coordinator for the whole process. Surrogacy is a combination of psychological experts, medical experts, legal experts, financial escrowing company, and insurance experts. And the agency is the entity that you hire to help you evaluate, select, and organize all of those components from start to finish so that you're successful in having a child. And they're all working in the right way at the right time for your success. Does that make sense? So the most important decision, if you're going to consider surrogacy, is the selection of your agency. Because the agency is there from before you select your clinic, and it will not leave your side until a year after the birth to make sure all of the insurance payments are coordinated and made and coverage has been enforced. The agency will be with you for 2 years or longer. The medical clinic will be with you for 3 months. The attorneys for a few weeks at a time. So the bottom line is that agency becomes your safety net and your link for the process. Now the question is, when you select an agency, what are the important questions to ask? Now, I started out life as a teacher, and what I've learned is I really want my students to get the answers that they want. So before I start telling you what I think is important, do you have questions? Because I'm sure you all talked to 100 different people today and your heads are ready to explode. And this person told you one thing and this person told you something totally opposite. And you're going, well, you can't both be right. So what things have you heard that have confused you today, if anything?
I mean, one thing that's going through my mind, if you're differentiating between like separated organizations or an agency, I'd like to know how flexible are agencies when you decide to bring your own doctor, your own lawyer, your own external body into this arrangement?
Every agency is going to be different, so that's a great question to ask. Some agencies only work with one clinic. If you work with them, you have to work with this clinic. Some agencies only refer to a particular lawyer. Our agency is designed to customize your process to you, which is why in the first step, for example, we don't say you have to work with ORM. We say, here's ORM, here's their success rate, this is what they cost, these are the type of programs they do or don't have a donor pool. Here's Las Vegas Fertility Center, here's La Jolla, here's Connecticut Fertility. Here are the benefits and the disadvantages of each. What are your priorities? What do you need and which one matches you the best? And then, if you have a clinic through a referral network or a friend that went through someone we've never worked with, and you say, I'd like to work there, we say, okay, we contact that clinic, we research them, and we fit your piece into your process. Hopefully you won't need an attorney, because if you were to hire us, I would be your attorney. I'd be personally offended if you didn't think I was good enough. And actually, I've been doing surrogacy law for 30 years, and I have been the chairperson of the National Legal Organization for Surrogacy Attorneys in the United States for the last 7. So I have developed policy and model laws and communicated with our State Department in The Hague on international surrogacy policy. There probably isn't an attorney in the United States that knows more than I do, and there are very few that know as much.
You always represent the
I always represent the intended parents. So if you were to select Iarc, Iarc is located in Minnesota. That's in the middle, next to Canada. It's warm in the summer, it's not always winter. And most of our surrogates come from Minnesota or Wisconsin, which are states which are particularly well suited to surrogacy for insurance reasons. And I'm going to get to that, because that's your single most important topic. So since most of the surrogates are from Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I'm licensed in both those states, I draft your contract, I help you evaluate insurance, I do the parentage proceedings, I walk with you to the passport office, I do everything except pack your suitcase and put you on the plane at the end of the day. So you have guaranteed representative and advocacy in the process from start to finish.
You're also the mediating body between us and the surrogate mother. So
We also, the agency itself, because I have two separate entities. I have a law firm and I have Iarc, which is an agency. And I function in the law firm and I'm the director of Iarc, but I have employees here that facilitate all of the negotiation and the coordination with the surrogate and the screening and the matching. I represent you as an attorney and the surrogate has a different attorney. And that's how the system is set up. So you always have an advocate in me, and the agency acts as a buffer between you and the surrogate that's mediating and keeping that relationship in satisfactory synergy.
Again, is it common like that the surrogate mothers will be using your services as a lawyer, or do they bring their own?
Never. She always has a different
separate
lawyer.
one.
Always. She will have a different one for the contract. If she has questions about how the contract is enforced, she will go to that attorney. If she wants an attorney in the parentage proceedings, she will have that same attorney. But she typically never does use or need an attorney after the contract phase because everything is in order. So let's talk. Any other questions? Confusions? All right, so let's talk a little bit about insurance, because insurance is the most confusing thing about surrogacy. In the United States, let me rewind. So I've been in London, Dublin, and now Tel Aviv, and in all those places I've been shadowed by the people who are saying, Canada is my best option for surrogacy. And they say that it's very easy legally and reliable, and they say that it's very good for insurance. So, I've been working with Canadian clinics for 25 years. I have Canadian attorneys in the organization of which I was the chair. The one thing we know about Canada for sure that cannot be disputed is the Canadian government has said surrogacy for compensation is illegal. You cannot pay a woman to be a surrogate, and you cannot pay anyone to match you with a surrogate. It's against the law. They're not enforcing the law, but the law is there. But they're not enforcing the law. But the law is still there. If they ever decide to enforce it, they don't even have to pass it. They just have to make a decision in a day that they can arrest people and stop processes. In addition, you're told that babies in Canada have insurance coverage. Well, if you look on the internet, I want you to search the internet on Canadian surrogacy. You will find articles that are talking about hospitals in Canada that are now asking for cash payment up front because they will not put the babies under Canadian insurance in some places. Not in all, but in some, and it's spreading. And in some provinces, you can only get coverage if you say the baby's going to stay there for 6 months. And I don't think you want to stay there for 6 months. So there are some wrinkles in the Canadian process. And the best you can say about the Canadian process is that it's illegal, but they're not enforcing it. In the United States, it's legal. It's reliable. You have excellent medical coverage. And there's no question that at the end of the day, you're going to be the parent of the child. So you can take a little bit of risk over here where they're skirting around the law, or you can be absolutely guaranteed of success over here where it's in compliance with the law. I think U.S. surrogacy is better for that reason. And for insurance coverage, you have 3 separate questions. 1, is the pregnancy and delivery of the surrogate going to be covered? 2, if something bad happens to her and she has complications, will that be covered? 3, when my baby is born, will my baby have health insurance? For the first 2, which are both connected, that will either be covered under the surrogate's policy that has maternity coverage without an exclusion for surrogate pregnancy. So as your legal representative, I read the policy, I determine if there's maternity coverage, I determine if there's an exclusion, and if there's not, you have insurance for the maternity, delivery, and complications. You're covered.
Which means the surrogate mothers that you take are only those who have the inclusive insurance?
We qualify both kinds, but you decide whether that's what you want to do, because the second option is if she has a policy that has an exclusion. Under Obamacare, there are policies in most states and in all of the states where we work where you can buy a separate policy on the surrogate under the exchange for the Obamacare that doesn't have a surrogacy exclusion. So she will either have her own policy without an exclusion, or we can buy a policy under Obamacare. The difference is you don't have to pay her monthly premiums here because that's her expense. Here you would have to pay the monthly premiums in addition to the deductibles and out-of-pocket maximums. So getting coverage for the surrogate maternity and delivery and complications is very straightforward and relatively inexpensive. The question is, can you get coverage for the child? That depends on whether you work in a pre-birth state. California, Nevada, Illinois are examples of states where courts enter orders immediately upon birth that make you the parent. The benefit of that is you say the surrogate can't change her mind and keep the baby. The reality is surrogates don't change their mind and keep the baby. If you work through an agency that's properly screened their surrogate, that surrogate's not going to change her mind. We've done hundreds of surrogates and nobody has ever changed their mind. In fact, what our surrogates ask when they start the process is, how are you going to promise me that parent's going to take the child, because I don't want it? So they're afraid you won't take it and you're afraid they won't give it up. But the reality is they analyzed 15,000 surrogacies. Out of 15,000 surrogacies, there were 89 where there was conflict. Only 27 were surrogates that threatened to keep the child, usually not through an agency and usually just to get more money. 62 were parents that didn't want the child because it was handicapped, or they got divorced, or they went bankrupt, or something happened. So that's a failure rate of less than 0.25%. So the reality is your biggest fear that the surrogate will keep the child is the least likely thing that's going to happen. So having a pre-birth order doesn't protect you against much. But what it does is it cuts the surrogate's relationship off with the child at birth, which means that child without a legal connection to her is not legally her child and cannot be an eligible dependent under her policy for insurance. And it's not her legal child to take on her residence as a resident of the U.S. to qualify for Obamacare. So if you work in a post-birth state, which is Minnesota or Wisconsin or a similar state, the law says the surrogate cannot change her parental rights till after birth. You wait until the baby's out of the hospital, then you change the parentage, which means while the baby's in the hospital, it's an eligible dependent under her insurance policy and it's covered. Or you can buy a policy for the baby under Obamacare as long as it's a resident of that state, and since it's the child of the surrogate, its residence is imputed to its parent's residence, so it qualifies for Obamacare. So I always tell international couples or parents that are thinking of surrogacy in the U.S., your biggest economic risk is that post-birth care of the child.
I'm sorry to interrupt your stand-up comedy show. You do have, even though you're staying here, you have to take a little break and let people go out and come in, okay?
All right, thank you. Or not. So that's your biggest economic risk, and it's got two certain solutions as long as you work in a state where the surrogate retains that relationship for insurance purposes. And since the risk of her keeping the child is nearly zero and the risk of not having insurance is extremely high, it's more important to protect against that risk. And I encourage you all to work with agencies that match you with surrogates and do the legal process in the post-birth states, which is what we do.
What about the case of early birth?
Pardon?
Of early birth and all.
If a child is born prematurely, the insurance will still cover. But if you have a premature child in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit in the United States for 3 weeks, it's going to be a $300,000 US bill. You want insurance coverage for that. That's your most important risk. All right. That's all, folks. You're welcome. And remember, this doesn't have to be on the film. I don't know if you were at my presentation yesterday for 3 minutes, but I started out life as a teacher. Education is free. You can Skype me, call me, email me, and I will talk to you as long as you want to at no charge with no obligation. And if you don't have my card, I'll give you some out of my bag.